to another edition of the 66 to 87 podcast. This is Tom Reed, joined as always by Dave Molinari. We are recording this moments after the Penguins 3-2 overtime win on Thursday night. A kind of a gutty win, given how many players were out of the lineup. And Chris Letang, who just came back into the lineup, scores the game-winning goal. But Dave, right now, I think that the big story with this group that has battled adversity from from the off season, when they knew two of their biggest stars were going to be out for some time, is just how they, really found a way to win tonight with a really, or I should say not tonight, but Thursday night, with a really depleted lineup to get at least 2 points out of that game to end a 3-game losing streak.
Yeah, and they had a lot of the elements, that they're going to need if they're going to have such a watered down lineup. I mean, they got outstanding goaltending from Tristan Jarry. That's probably the biggest thing. He stopped 36 of 38 shots, and I don't think even his most harsh critic will blame him on either of the goals that the Flyers scored. Chris Letang, they eased back into the lineup by only playing him for, I think it was 28 minutes and 50 seconds. And I suspect that the off-ice officials probably missed some of his playing time. It seemed like he was out there constantly. They finally got another goal from Jake Gensel, which was very badly needed.
Number 2 of the season.
Yeah, not only by them, but for his mental well-being, I think getting a goal was pretty important. They still, they left a lot of potential goals out there, especially early in the first half of the game. They had some rebound opportunities that really should have been converted. The two that come immediately to mind were chances for Gensel and Mike Matheson. And I believe there was at least one other that when you're a team that's going to be struggling to score goals, you've got to convert those good opportunities. So, they did an admirable job of beating a pretty good team while using a very diluted lineup. But, I don't know if it's the good news or the bad news, but they could play better.
Sure. Now, just for fans that they're kind of losing track of the people that are in and out of the lineup. First of all, you include Mike Sullivan, who, according to the Penguins earlier in the day, is symptomatic. So he's probably going to be out for a little while. Guys that did not play on Thursday night: Marcus Pettersson, Chad Riedel, Sidney Crosby, who just came back into the lineup the other night against New Jersey, and Brian Dumoulin. And then, of course, you still do not have Evgeny Malkin or Brian Rust, who have just other injuries. But Dave, I want to focus right now on the COVID situation with the Penguins. The season started with Zach Aston Reese, did not play early and missed the first couple games because of it. Jeff Carter, we mentioned Letang. Letang just came back in the lineup, and as you mentioned, they certainly put him to use tonight, and of course he does get the winner. But Dave, this was a team last year that was excellent as far as not really having many problems, if at all, any problems with COVID. They did a great job of really it not becoming an impact as it did for some teams. You think back to Washington in the playoffs. But what do you think's going on, or is it's just the way the world is right now?
Well, I think it's mostly a commentary on the virus. The Penguins have been, from all indications, really quite diligent about trying to keep the virus out of their locker room. They seem to be doing a good job with wearing masks when they're away from the ice. Certainly, guys when they do interviews, which are all done from behind a podium, well distanced from reporters. A lot of them have masks on. The Penguins are testing everybody, players, coaches, and staffers every day, which is more often than the league requires teams to do. So it's not as if they've adopted the mindset that, well, COVID is over, let's
Right.
get on with life. They've still been quite cautious, but it doesn't take much. It really just one guy, presumably who is asymptomatic, doesn't realize that he's carrying the virus. He brings it into the locker room, and that's it. The dam has broken, and it doesn't take it doesn't take much after that to spread to one guy, and then another, and then another, and then another, and pretty soon you end up with a list of guys in the COVID protocol. It's almost as big as the rest of your roster.
Yeah, and with Crosby, you feel really bad for him because he'd worked so hard to get back into the lineup. He comes back for one game, and now because he's symptomatic, my understanding is it's a kind of a 10-day window here now. So he's going to miss he did not just miss that game. He's going to miss some more time.
Yeah, it's not exactly the start to the season that he would have wanted, that's for sure. But dealing with injuries and over the past year and a half or so, ailments, that's part of the challenge of winning in this league. So, it's difficult for the individuals. It's difficult for teams that are as hard hit by the virus as the Penguins have been. But, that's that's life in the NHL. You have to overcome the challenges that the game and life present you with.
I thought that was a big win Thursday. I really did. I mean, it's the first week of November, so there's a long way to go. But with the game losing streak, with the Flyers getting back into the game late, tying it, that would have been a tough one to swallow had they lost that game, even in overtime. Let alone give up another late goal to have lost and not got a point. I know we were talking off air. You did give the Flyers a point. I mean, that's the one thing about it. It's not a Western Conference game where you really don't care if that team gets the point. But I thought that was a big win, and I do think that was some before you were joking earlier, but that was a Ray Bourque-like minutes eating of by Letang, who ends up scoring the winner on a wraparound.
Yeah, he had been averaging a bit over 26 minutes per game of ice time through his first 4 games this season. That's a pretty impressive total in its own right. And
Exactly.
none of those 4 games came immediately after he had been off the ice for 10 days because of coronavirus. So and he not only played a lot, he played very well. He did not look like a guy who had was coming off of a 2-week layoff.
And he did say he met with the media earlier in the day on Thursday, and he flat out said he just had about just everything you could have that is kind of linked to the virus, right down to, I think, losing his taste and smell, or maybe one of the other. But it wasn't
he
just,
said,
go ahead.
Yeah, he said that he lost both sense of taste and smell, and all of the other symptoms that we've come to associate with coronavirus. Apparently, he managed to experience them all.
Well, he certainly didn't look like it. Again, that was a pretty gutty performance with a really skeleton group. Mike Sullivan. Hey, Todd Reardon back in the win column as the head coach. That was again a big win against a division rival. We're just getting started here. We'll be back on the DK Pittsburgh Sports podcasting network. You are listening to the 66 to 87 podcast. Welcome back to the 66 to 87 podcast. And Dave, a story that we'd first learned about in November regarding the Penguins and a lawsuit that is going to be filed now by Erin Scully, the wife of former Pittsburgh Penguins minor league assistant coach Jared Scully. Looks like that lawsuit is going to go forward in Rhode Island. Obviously, we'd much rather be talking about some hockey stuff, but this is something we can't ignore, especially after we talked so much last week about what's going on in Chicago. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in our third segment. But again, this is something that has now come to the Penguins, the front door too. Bill Guerin, who was the former assistant general manager of the Penguins, who is now with the Minnesota Wild, who, by the way, is the Penguins' next opponent. If you're listening on Saturday, that's who they're playing. We don't know if Bill Guerin will be in town or not. This is something that very serious in nature. It's an alleged sexual assault in a vehicle several years ago. They are claiming that it was brought to the attention of Bill Guerin several months later, 6 or 7 months later, and allegedly, according to the lawsuit, Guerin had just kind of told them to keep a lid on this. Let's keep this quiet. Then if you follow along, Jared Scully ends up not being with the organization anymore. Dave, when you look at this, and again, the evidence will come out, assuming the trial goes forward. Just your initial thoughts of what's going on here.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's troubling. You don't want to jump to conclusions because there's a whole lot of questions that haven't been answered yet. There's a lot of information that we still need, but the simple allegation that there was, a sexual assault involving the former coach of the Penguins farm team in Wilkes-Barre, that the Penguins did not, aggressively look into and, take action, based on their findings. That's kind of troubling, especially in the context of, any number of other things that are going on in the hockey world right now.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've mentioned by name Clark Donatelli, is the coach that you referred to. He's the one being alleged to have committed the sexual assault. Also named in the lawsuit, the owners of the team, Mario Lemieux and Ron Burkle. But I would think this really, with Bill Guerin, who, of course, fans came to really, really appreciate and like here for his time winning a cup as a player, and also in management with the second two cups, and whose career had been who's off to a pretty good start in Minnesota. This is probably the person, probably with most to lose here as we go forward, assuming if there is something there to continue on this. Guerin is also being investigated by the U.S. Center of Safe Sport. He was named as the assistant general manager to the 2022 Olympic team. So you were thinking he would be reunited with Mike Sullivan. This has to be, I would have to say, a troubling time here for Bill Guerin and just this kind of publicity that's hanging over him. And again, we're not saying anything happened or didn't happen, but it's certainly not something kind of headlines you'd welcome.
No, obviously not. And Guerin was widely regarded as the guy most likely to step in as GM of the U.S. Olympic team after Stan Bowman, who had been in that position, resigned following the scandal in Chicago. where he was GM of the Blackhawks. So yeah, this this is a very troubling situation for Guerin. Presumably, the ongoing investigation or investigations will determine whether he had any culpability in anything that went on, or in covering up or not thoroughly investigating anything that is alleged to have gone on. But this would certainly seem to be a black cloud that's hanging over him at the moment.
And part of this as well, to be clear, one of the things that is being contended here is that the Penguins violated state whistleblower statutes by firing him on May 5th. And when I say him, I mean Jared Scaldi, because he complained to the team about the alleged assault. That's the part also that when we're talking a lot about Guerin, that does not necessarily look good for the organization. That's the part where I think it looks rough for the organization. And again, we're not saying anything as far as they're in trouble, they're not in trouble. That will come out in court. But Dave, right now, with the environment that's going on in the NHL, especially after this high-profile case in Chicago, I would think the NHL would really be on their toes for whatever evidence comes out of this.
Yeah, you would think. And as far as Scaldi's departure from the Penguins organization, I believe that they have presented it as one of a number of layoffs that came about because staff
Correct.
reductions because of COVID. So, whether that was the actual reason that he was terminated, I certainly can't say one way or the other, but that is the official explanation from the organization for his departure.
And unlike, again, this we're going apples and oranges here, but unlike the Chicago incident where everybody was implicated, right? Everybody from the obviously the perpetrator Aldridge all the way up through the organization in the management. It's very important. We want to note that former general manager Jim Rutherford was not named in this. So he is not named in this lawsuit. So again, I keep coming back to, it's a lot of this seems to be falling in Bill Guerin's lap. And it's going to be really interesting going forward to see what happens with Bill Guerin. And again, beyond what's happening here, had a really strong start to his career in Minnesota. We will continue to monitor this as there's evidence is presented, assuming this trial goes forward and this case goes forward. We'll continue. And I do want to make an apology to our listeners. Last week we had Michael Russo on, who does a great job covering Minnesota Wild for The Athletic, and we were talking with him, and I neglected not to ask him about Bill Guerin's situation. There really hasn't been a lot coming out of Minnesota about this, but I do apologize for not bringing that question to the table for Mike Russo. When we come back, Dave and I are going to, normally we have a guest in our third segment. We're not going to talk about that today. We're going to just get into a little bit more of what we're talking about, and really one of the overarching concerns here is kind of this code of silence in the NHL that has been part of the league since almost from the beginning. And if at some point here, one of these cases maybe forces some changes, maybe some changes in people at the top of the NHL chain, or what has to happen here to maybe try to dissuade some of this stuff, or at least when it comes to the attention of teams, trying to take it and nipping it in the bud and trying to be more transparent with it. That's our next topic on the 66 to 87 podcast. Welcome back to the 66 to 87 podcast. Dave, we just got done talking about what was happening with this lawsuit that apparently will go forward involving the Penguins. And one of the allegations in there is by the Scaldi family that Bill Guerin just told them to keep a lid on this. Let's keep a lid on this. Let's not publicize it. And then, of course, everything as we laid out goes forward. Scaldi ends up getting let go. The lawsuit goes forward in November. But I want to talk to you a little bit about this idea in this sport, about this culture of silence that seems to be greater in hockey than in the other major sports. Now, not to say every sport has its problems. We've saw all of what happened with the Washington football team in recent years. Any sport, it all has its problems. But I think more so than any other sport in North America, this whole idea of this culture of keeping it in the room, so to speak, keeping it within the organization is more pervasive in hockey than any other sport. And I think at some point here, there needs to be a call for change in that, and to be a little bit more transparent, a little bit more progressive in dealing with these type of cases when they arise.
Well, I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I also don't know that it's realistic to think that the sort of change you suggest is something that could be done quickly. The culture of hockey has been largely unchanged through all the decades that I've been around the game, and is rooted as deeply as can be. So we're not talking about a mindset or an attitude that you only find in the NHL. It the keep it in the room mentality certainly extends down to major junior hockey, and I have to believe at development levels below that. I don't know how far down to what age group you would find the origins of that, but it certainly is in just about every layer of hockey that involves playing on a competitive level.
You're absolutely right. Will it take something? The Blackhawks thing is certainly it's gotten a lot bigger headlines, and rightly so. Can this possibly be a change agent? And when I ask you this, I am saying, bearing in mind with almost the tone deaf press conference the other day given by Gary Bettman, in which he went through, he's a lawyer and just did not seem to understand the gravity of it, where he's trying to parse things with language of a lawyer. And I thought it really came off poorly as someone who just wasn't in touch. Gary Bettman has been at the commissioner of the NHL since the early 90s. It's a group of guys that are running this league, that have been running it for a long time. And one of the criticisms of hockey, fair or unfair, is just as you mentioned, it's kind of, this is the way it's always been. What has to change? You just said it's ingrained, and I agree with you 100%. What has to change? Does it have to be from the fan standpoint, either protests or not going to games? What draws the league's attention to this is serious, and we can't keep having this bad publicity every year, or in hockey in general? every year these type of stories coming out.
Well, I mean, the key there is that it's not just the NHL. If it was only that league that had these issues, then yes, perhaps the fans could have an impact by boycotting, not watching on TV, not buying tickets, not buying merchandise or whatever. But you're talking about the culture of a sport that extends, down through many layers and levels of the game. I suppose it's conceivable that what went on in Chicago could be the spark that initiates a change in the culture of the game. But frankly, I wouldn't be optimistic about it. There have been some pretty heinous incidents at a number of levels of the game, over the years, and none of that has, made a significant difference in the culture. So I'm not sure that it's realistic to expect this to have any sort of long-term impact.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I look at a league like the NBA, and the NBA no league is driven by players more than the NBA, and the owners in that league are, I think, the most progressive of any of the owners in any sport, and there's a partnership there. There's a partnership, and I can't see this type of story ever happening in the NBA, because no player in the NBA, no star in the NBA, LeBron James, if something like this happened on his team, this would not be kept quiet. This would not be suppressed. This would not be an open secret within the locker room that never sees the light of day. And I'm wondering, in the NHL, that partnership does not exist. As far as I'm concerned, it is not a league. It's a league that's run by the owners. There's certainly a players' union, but it is not a partnership. And I'm wondering if that's where this has to start. We just saw one of the most successful coaches in the NHL lose his job for this, Joe Quenneville, and was in Florida. He wasn't still even in Chicago. He was in Florida when this happens. Does something like that maybe give some of these decision makers, these guys that run these teams, maybe that is what happened to Joe Quenneville, and maybe what ends up happening again with Billy Guerin, as something that these guys are going to have to start to, I don't want to say taking seriously isn't the right phrase, but to understand the consequences of suppressing. We'll go with strictly with the Chicago story, because enough of it has come out now. Maybe that's what it's going to take to see a guy like Joe Quenneville lose his job and maybe not get another chance to be back in the NHL, to maybe wake up some of these people to take this kind of stuff a little bit more seriously.
Well, I mean, that might be the case if, every incident of this sort came to light.
Right.
But we have no reason to believe that it doesn't, or that it does. That 90% of the things that we would find really troubling, they might well be successfully suppressed. As this Chicago incident was for so many years. So, if you're only having, say, 10% of your scandals get a public airing, maybe you decide that's something you can live with to preserve a status quo that you like. And something else to keep in mind here is that Gary Bettman is not charged with being a steward of the game of hockey. He's charged with making the league as profitable as possible for the guys who are his bosses, who are the 32 owners and ownership groups in the league. You'd like to think that looking out for what's best for the game is also what's best for the owners, but I don't know that that's necessarily always the case.
And once again, I don't disagree with you, and that's why this whole what we're talking about, I think, is such a challenge to the NHL, because it is, to me, of the four major sports, the least progressive. And I do, as a fan of this game, I'm 57, about to be 57. I have never been more embarrassed of hockey in the last couple of years with this stuff. And at some point, I think it's going to start catching up to the league. And I hope it does. I hope somewhere in New York or Toronto or wherever wherever you want to say the front office is, that the league starts to look at this and say, we have to start taking this stuff. When something comes out, we have to aggressively go after it, make it public, because I just don't know how many more of these type of scandals the NHL can handle. Because as you mentioned, Dave, this is not just an NHL issue. And that's part of the difficulty. This goes all the way down. Last year, the story that came out in junior hockey with the Sarnia Sting, that only came to light because Dan Carcillo, years after the incidents of bullying with several players on the Sarnia Sting in the Ontario Hockey League back in 2002, 2003, only came to light because Carcillo finally brought it up. And then another player, Dan Fritchie, who played in the league for 7-8 more years, kind of said, yes, it did happen. And that's the only way this comes out. At some point, I think hockey has to have this kind of reckoning with itself and say, we just can't keep having this happen to us. Again, it's going to happen in every league, but it just seems this kind of story just seems to keep happening in the NHL and in hockey in general, year after year. And to me, I throw my hands up and say, when is someone going to start taking this more seriously?
It's a fair question, but I would say if you're waiting for that to happen, you better take a very deep breath, because I'm not optimistic that there are going to be any profound changes at the NHL level, let alone at the levels below that, anytime soon.
Well, again, I hope fans understand this is the reason we did not have a guest today. I wanted to bring this up. I wanted to have a little back and forth about this. We will get back to matters, of course, of hockey and all the fun stuff we like to talk about here on the 60-60-87 podcast. But for us today, I thought this was a good day to kind of address some of this stuff, bring it to light. And again, we'll see. Unfortunately, I share Dave's opinion that I don't know what is going to change. I hope something does change for the better of the game, and we'll see where it goes from here. That's it for us this week on the 66-87 podcast. We will be back next week with a guest, and I think we'll get back to a lot of hockey talk. Thanks for listening on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network.